Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. I've always believed that a good workplace doesn't just feel like a job, it feels like a part of your identity. And for over 11 years, that's exactly what Grayson and Hart was for me. I was Layla Sinclair, the Director of Strategic Operations, and I was damn good at it. I climbed the ladder slowly, steadily, one deadline and late-night project at a time. When I first started, I was the quiet one in the corner cubicle with ideas too big for her title. But I kept my head down and let my work speak for me. By year 5, the executive team had taken notice. By year 7, I had my own corner office, a dedicated team, and the ear of the CEO himself, Richard Kane. Richard, God, I miss that man. He was the kind of leader you rarely come across. Calm, fair, and fiercely loyal to the people who gave their all. He never micromanaged, but he always knew exactly what was happening on the floor. He remembered birthdays, brought coffee during late nights, and always gave credit where it was due. He once told me, "Layla, this company breathes because of people like you. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." And I didn't, not until he was gone. We all knew something was off when the board started meeting more frequently behind closed doors. Rumors swirled, mergers, buyouts, whispers of performance optimization. Then, one Monday morning, Richard was just gone. No farewell, no goodbye email, just a sterile company-wide memo. We thank Mr. Kane for his years of service and wish him well in his future endeavors. Bull. They pushed him out. The announcement of our new CEO followed within hours. Colin Dresner, formerly of Hallberg Systems, will be stepping in immediately. The name meant nothing to most of us. A quick Google search brought up some vague achievements, turnarounds, streamlining initiatives, boardroom accolades, but not one photo of him smiling, not one quote about teamwork or valuing people, just numbers. I felt a chill then, though I tried to shrug it off. The morning Colin was introduced, he walked through the office like a man inspecting property, not people, polished shoes, tailored suit, and an expression that made Botox look warm. He shook hands without looking anyone in the eye. When he reached me, I stood, offered my hand, and smiled. "Layla Sinclair, Director of Strategic Ops. Welcome aboard." He looked at me like I'd just introduced myself as a barista. No handshake, just a nod. "We'll be evaluating all departments soon." I sat back down with my pulse thudding in my ears. That week, the energy in the office shifted. It wasn't just the tension. It was the silence. Meetings canceled, hallway chatter gone quiet, colleagues walking like they were trying not to be noticed. And me? I kept doing what I'd always done, leading projects, supporting my team, keeping the wheels turning. But I was watching, listening. Colin started meeting one-on-one with department heads, starting from the top down. I was scheduled for Friday at 3 p.m. Classic move. Fire someone right before the weekend. I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe he just wanted to talk about process improvement. Maybe he'd seen my track record. My performance scores were stellar, my teams hit every metric. But deep down, I knew. People like Colin didn't come in to build. They came in to clean house. And women like me? We were often the first to go, too visible, too opinionated, too established to manipulate. Still, I wore my best navy blazer, pulled my hair into a low twist, and walked into that meeting like it was any other business review. What I didn't expect was how fast it would all fall apart. It didn't take long for Colin Dresner's true nature to slither out from behind the boardroom doors. The first week after his arrival, I thought he was simply cold and impersonal. The second week, I realized he was cruel. But by the third, there was no denying what we were dealing with. A man who truly believed women in leadership were a mistake. It started subtly. He restructured the leadership team, firing Karen in HR, demoting Teresa from marketing to some nebulous advisory role with no real duties, and mysteriously reassigning Marla, our head of finance, to an overseas office in Prague. Just like that, half of the executive women were gone or sidelined. In meetings, he interrupted women constantly, but let men drone on with half-baked ideas. If a woman proposed a plan, he'd frown and say something like, "Let's table that," only to greenlight the exact same suggestion 10 minutes later when it came from a man. The worst was during our Wednesday executive sync, a meeting I used to lead under Richard. Colin had taken over, of course, and now used it as his personal stage. That day, he motioned to Chelsea, one of the smartest analysts I know, and sneered, "Did someone let the intern write this report? Or is that your handwriting?" The report was immaculate, but the room went quiet. Chelsea flushed, lips tightening. "That's my formatting, sir. It's consistent with—" He waved her off. "Consistently hard to read, that's for sure. Maybe next time, leave the graphics to someone with a technical background." I caught her eye. She blinked fast, swallowed whatever pride she had left, and nodded. Colin turned to Tom, the junior analyst who once confused Q1 and Q4 in a report, and clapped him on the back like they were frat brothers. "Now this guy knows how to streamline a presentation. Good work." I almost choked on my coffee. Chelsea stayed late that night, revising a report that didn't need revising. I stayed too, mostly out of fury. When I passed her desk, I gently placed a wrapped granola bar next to her keyboard. "Thanks," she said quietly, not looking up. The following week, Colin scheduled a culture realignment meeting. You know what that means? It's the kind of vague initiative meant to gut morale under the guise of clarity. Everyone was required to attend, even mid-level staff. He stood at the front of the auditorium with a smirk, talking about modern efficiency, professional image, and gender-neutral communication. Then, as if reading a script from a 1950s playbook, he said, "And to be honest, I've found that women in senior roles tend to create unnecessary drama and inefficiency. Let's be honest, it's just not their natural strength." My stomach twisted. He paused, letting that sentence hang in the air like poison mist. Some people laughed, nervously. Others stayed silent. I saw two women in the back exchange glances. One of them crossed her arms tight across her chest, like she needed to hold herself together. That night, I went home, took off my heels, and stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. My reflection didn't look like someone who was afraid, but I was. Not for myself exactly. I'd been through hell in this industry and come out sharper for it. But I was afraid for the young women who hadn't learned yet how to fight back, for the Chelseas, for the interns who'd stop raising their hands. And yeah, I was afraid for myself too. Because if I said anything too soon, he'd bury me. But if I stayed quiet, he'd win. And Colin Dresner didn't deserve a single win. Not from women like me. It wasn't even subtle anymore. By the start of the fourth week under Colin Dresner's regime, Grayson and Hart was bleeding women from every department like it was a coordinated evacuation plan. Gone was Donna from compliance, no longer aligned with the company's evolving structure. Out went Priya from product, replaced by a fresh-out-of-B-school guy named Ethan who didn't even know how to pull his own data reports. Lauren from procurement was suddenly transferred to field operations, and Rebecca from legal? She resigned voluntarily, though I saw her in the stairwell the day after, crying into her phone. Every exit was couched in euphemisms. Realignment, strategic shift, internal transfer. But anyone who paid attention knew what was happening. Colin was clearing the ranks, and he was doing it with a smirk. Each replacement was a man. Young, slick, molded from the same elitist playbook that seemed to glorify confidence over competence. They all looked the same in team photos, smiling in fitted suits, gripping coffee like trophies, and nodding as if they already owned the place. And me? I was still there, still in my corner office, still working late, still delivering, still smiling through meetings even when I wanted to scream. But the truth was, I was scared. Colin hadn't touched my role yet, and that was the most terrifying part. Every time my phone buzzed with a calendar invite, I flinched. Every time someone walked past my door too slowly, I wondered if they were measuring it for someone else. One night, I stayed behind long after everyone else had gone, pretending to clean out old project files. In truth, I was scanning my email history, cataloging successes, saving documents, creating my own little archive. If they were going to erase me, they weren't taking the story with them. That's when I saw the name. An internal thread between Colin and our CFO, a newly appointed man I hadn't even met yet, titled Executive Refresh Proposals, Phase 2. I couldn't access the attachments, but the implication was loud and clear. I was phase 2. A part of me wanted to march into his office right then and demand answers. Ask him what kind of leader builds a team by tearing down every qualified woman in the building. But I didn't, because I knew how this worked. If I confronted him now, I'd be labeled emotional, difficult, not a culture fit. So instead, I took a breath. I saved what mattered. I made a plan, and I waited. Because Colin Dresner might think he's the kind of man who wins. But he was about to find out exactly what kind of woman I am. It happened on a Tuesday, which feels appropriate now. Tuesdays have a habit of hiding landmines beneath their boring, buttoned-up surface. Colin had been watching me more closely. I could feel it, like a chill that clings to the back of your neck, even when the thermostat says everything's fine. He passed by my office at least 3 times that morning. Once, he paused just long enough to make me glance up. Our eyes met through the glass, and he gave me that small, smug smile of his, the kind that says, "I'm coming." By lunchtime, I was done pretending to play nice. I caught him in the hallway as he was walking out of a meeting with the new VP of Sales, yet another young man fresh from Colin's revolving door of replacements. I stepped in front of him. "Got a minute?" I asked. He tilted his head, clearly amused. "Layla, of course." We ducked into a small meeting room. The second the door shut, I turned to face him. "You've made some changes," I began, voice steady. "And I've stayed out of your way. But if you're circling my position, let me be clear. I'm not going down quietly." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Interesting assumption." I folded my arms. It's not an assumption when every capable woman in this company has mysteriously resigned in the last 3 weeks. He smiled like a man who thinks he's being generous. "I'm simply ensuring our leadership reflects strength." "And you think strength only wears a tie?" I shot back. His jaw twitched, just slightly. That was when I knew I'd touched something. "I know what this is," I continued. "You don't like that I'm respected, that I've been here longer, that I'm smarter than some of the boys you've lined up behind you, maybe even smarter than you." He laughed, short, cold. "Smarter, Definitely more experienced. And while we're being honest, I'd take Chelsea over your new director of ops any day." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "You want to prove something, Layla? Fine." I didn't flinch. "I'm putting you on a special project," he said, suddenly animated. "The Green Core Logistics reintegration. It's a mess, cross-departmental, out of your usual scope." I narrowed my eyes. "That's supply chain and data infrastructure. Why me?" "Because," he said smoothly, "you said you're smarter than the men handling it now. Show me." I knew what this was. A trap. A task designed to make me stumble in front of the very people he planned to replace me with. The Green Core project had a reputation. It had already chewed through 3 project leads, and none of them had lasted more than 2 weeks. But I looked him in the eye and smiled. "Happy to," I said. "You'll have a preliminary strategy by Friday." He blinked, just for a second. He hadn't expected me to accept the challenge. As I walked out of that room, adrenaline buzzed in my veins. He thought he was testing me, but what he didn't realize was I'd been tested my entire career, and I had never failed a test that mattered. I was ready for a fight. Not a childish squabble, not office politics. I mean a real fight. A fair one. I'd stayed up until 2 in the morning all week, combing through the fractured Green Core project, piecing together the broken supply chain like a forensic analyst at a crime scene. I had notes, diagrams, financial projections, alternate supplier routes, even a phase-based recovery plan that would save the company nearly $1.3 million in the next 2 quarters. I wasn't there to survive. I was there to win. By Friday, I was running on caffeine and grit. I wore my sharpest blazer, pulled my hair into the kind of tight bun that screamed "I dare you," and walked into the executive conference room 5 minutes early. Colin was already seated, feet crossed, scrolling through his phone like he was too bored to even pretend he worked. He didn't acknowledge me until I placed the stack of documents in front of him. "Here's the revised integration strategy," I said evenly. "Includes cost projections, resource reallocation, tech backend stabilization, and a 5-month forecast based on incremental benchmarks." He didn't look up, just flipped through the first page like it was a takeout menu. Then he stood. The move was so casual, it made my skin prickle. "No need, Layla," he said, with a calmness that suddenly felt menacing. I blinked. "I'm sorry?" He folded the documents in half, casually, like it was nothing. "The board has already made a decision. Effective immediately, you're no longer employed at Grayson and Hart." I couldn't speak for a full second. The words didn't make sense. Not yet. "You're firing me?" I asked, voice low, measured. He smiled, like this was all a clever joke and I was just missing the punchline. "Let's not pretend this is about the Green Corps project, or about your capabilities," he said. "This isn't about performance, Layla. It never was." Something cracked in me, quietly, but irreparably. I took a slow breath, fighting the urge to speak. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I kept my expression neutral. And then, he said it. That sentence. The one that I would carry in my chest for months. The one that would echo in my sleep. A woman in a high position in a company will always ruin everything sooner or later. That was it. Not whispered, not slipped behind HR doublespeak. He said it like a man reading a fact from a manual, not just to insult me, but to dismiss every woman who had ever worked her way to the top, like we were all destined to fail, like our ambition was poison. The silence that followed felt like a vacuum, a moment suspended in glass. I could have screamed. I could have flipped the table, thrown every project report in his smug face. I could have demanded he explain to the board how firing one of the longest-serving directors right after a record turnaround project made any strategic sense. But I didn't. I smiled, not because I was okay, but because that's what you do when someone shows you who they really are and finally frees you from pretending they're anything else. I reached for my leather folder, tucked the flash drive from the back pocket into my purse. Yes, I'd backed everything up. Every email, every document, every contribution with my name and timestamp. And I stood. "Thank you," I said simply. He looked confused by my calmness, as if expecting a meltdown. "Best of luck with Green Corps," I added before turning to leave. I didn't wait for a response. I walked through the office with my chin high, past desks filled with silent onlookers who didn't yet know what had happened, past the assistant who gave me a small, sad smile, past the HR director who couldn't even meet my eyes. The elevator doors closed behind me with a quiet hiss, and that's when I exhaled, not in defeat, but in clarity, because Colin had made one fatal error. He thought I needed this job. He thought I would crumble. He had no idea that he'd just given me the best possible weapon, his own words, and I planned to use them with surgical precision. I didn't leave in despair. I didn't cry in the elevator. I didn't sit in my car and stare blankly at the dashboard. I didn't clutch the steering wheel with white knuckles or call anyone to vent. I just left. Calm, clear-headed, and strangely at peace, because something had shifted. Colin thought he'd humiliated me, that he'd buried me with a single sentence, a single signature. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that he'd just set a timer, and the countdown had already started. You see, I knew something he didn't. An acquisition had been brewing for months. Not public knowledge yet, but whispered among senior staff. An extremely delicate collaboration between Grayson and Hart and a powerful sustainability tech firm with global ties. It was supposed to be Colin's first major deal, the one that would cement his reputation as a decisive new leader. It hadn't been finalized yet, but I knew who was leading it from the other side. Her name was Ava Malik, CEO of Evergreen Systems. She was sharp, deliberate, and known for her uncompromising ethics. We'd met years ago at a Women in Strategy Summit. I'd been a guest panelist. She was the keynote speaker. Afterward, we chatted briefly, exchanged cards, and connected again a few months later when she consulted with our firm on an energy bid. She remembered everything. She remembered me. We weren't close, but she respected me. And Colin? Well, he had no idea Ava existed, let alone that the deal he was about to walk into required her signature. And if there's one thing Ava Malik didn't tolerate, it was misogynists pretending to be visionaries. I walked out of that office knowing two things with absolute certainty. I would be okay. Colin Dresner was about to have the most humbling meeting of his career. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd built his fortress on the belief that women ruin everything. But the moment he fired me, he lit the fuse on his own implosion. I didn't need revenge. All I had to do was wait. The days that followed felt like the quiet just before a summer storm. Warm, heavy, charged. I imagined Colin walking through the executive floor, confident and smirking, shaking hands with board members, feeling untouchable. He probably poured himself a celebratory scotch the night I left, convinced he'd eliminated one more distraction from his path. He didn't know I was still watching. Didn't know I was still working. From the outside, I disappeared. No LinkedIn post, no dramatic farewell message, no email to my former team. Just silence. I let him feel like he'd won. Because arrogant men like Colin always fall harder when no one warns them they're about to trip. And it was nearly time. The Evergreen Systems project, the one he'd been preparing to close for months, was scheduled for final negotiation the following week. It was Colin's golden goose, the deal that was supposed to validate his leadership. He'd been boasting about it in private board memos like it was already signed. But there was one small, crucial detail he'd overlooked. The signature, Ava Malek's. He knew her by name now, of course. Probably thought she was just another executive to impress with his rehearsed charm and slick pitch deck. But he didn't know her. Not the way I did. Ava didn't just believe in ethical leadership. She demanded it. She'd walked out of contracts for less than a mistyped DEI clause. She had personally canceled a merger with a billion-dollar firm after discovering their internal pay equity report. And now she was about to be face-to-face with Colin, unless I got to her first. That night, I opened my laptop in the quiet of my apartment, my fingers poised over the keyboard for several minutes before I began typing. Subject: an urgent matter. Regarding Grayson and heart dear Ava, I hope you're well. You may remember me. We met at the WIS Summit and again during the Cleanport Initiative 3 years ago. I'm reaching out privately and carefully, not as a competitor or a whistleblower, but as a woman who believes in the kind of leadership you've always stood for. Until last week, I was the Director of Strategic Operations at Grayson & Hart. I was let go by the new CEO, Colin Dresner, after refusing to stay silent about his treatment of female executives. Since his arrival, every woman in a senior position has either been fired, demoted, or quietly replaced by a man, despite consistent performance and long-standing tenure. When I challenged him, he told me, verbatim, that a woman in a high position in a company will always ruin everything sooner or later. That's the man representing Grayson in your upcoming negotiations. I have nothing to gain from this. I'm no longer with the company, but you deserve to know who's sitting across the table. In solidarity, Layla Sinclair. I hovered over the send button for one long, full breath. Then I clicked. I didn't know what Ava would do, but I knew this. I had told the truth. And now, the fuse was lit. The day of the meeting arrived like a final act in a play I knew by heart. Grayson and Hart's entire top brass had cleared their schedules for it. The Evergreen Systems deal was too valuable to leave to chance. The boardroom was staged like a showroom, fresh flowers, glossy portfolios, artisanal coffee lined up like props. Everything polished, everything ready. Except Colin. He was ready in a different way. Smug, overconfident, gleaming with that same hollow bravado I'd seen the day he fired me. He wore his tailored suit like armor, rehearsed pleasantries probably loaded into memory like cue cards. What he didn't know was that he was walking straight into a performance of his own. At precisely 10 a.m., Ava Malek entered, elegant, poised, and radiating a presence that made the entire room sit straighter. She wore a charcoal gray pantsuit and no makeup save for a deep, bold lipstick, like a woman who didn't need to soften anything. She didn't smile. She didn't offer small talk. She took her seat at the head of the table as if the chair belonged to her. And then she waited. Colin opened the meeting with a laugh and a handshake she didn't accept. He didn't notice. Miss Malek, we've prepared a full presentation. I think you'll find the numbers exceed expectations. I'm sure they do, she said coolly, without looking at the slides. But before we begin, I'd like to discuss corporate culture, transparency, values, leadership ethics. My team tells me those things are foundational at Evergreen. Are they foundational here? Colin blinked. Of course, he said. We're deeply committed to diversity and inclusion. Really? She cut in, tone still soft, still deadly. Because I received a troubling message from a former senior executive. A woman. She claims every female leader has been removed or sidelined since your appointment. His jaw twitched. The room froze. Surely there's some misunderstanding, he began, his voice tightening. Disgruntled employees tend to exaggerate. Disgruntled or honest? She asked, her eyes narrowing. She says you told her, direct quote, a woman in a high position will always ruin everything sooner or later. Is that accurate? Colin laughed awkwardly. That's absurd. You can't take one person's bitter claims. Ava turned her head, very slowly, and looked at him the way he often looked at women in meetings, like they were wasting space. It sounds exactly like something you'd say. Colin's smile dropped. He shifted in his seat. With all due respect, Miss Malik, I don't appreciate being interrogated in my own boardroom. Good, she said. Because I'm not here to appreciate you. I'm here to assess if my company should sign a multi-million-dollar agreement with a man who sees women as liabilities. He snapped. I built this company's recovery from the ground up. I made the tough calls no one else would make. People like her, like you, don't understand the pressure of command. There it was. His mask finally cracked, and all around the table, faces changed. Two board members exchanged glances. The head of legal leaned back in her chair, frowning. The CFO stared at his notes, pretending not to hear. Ava remained perfectly still. Then she stood. Thank you, Mr. Dresner. That was illuminating. He stood too, flustered, hands spread like he could still salvage this. Wait, this is a negotiation. No, she said sharply. This was an evaluation. She turned to the board. I suggest you reevaluate your leadership, because this man just cost you your most important partnership. And with that, Ava walked out. The door didn't slam. It didn't need to. The silence left behind was far louder. The fallout didn't happen immediately, but you could feel the air shift inside Grayson and Hart like a building under pressure. The very next day, the Evergreen deal was officially declared inactive. No statement, no explanation, just silence where Colin had expected a trophy. That silence, however, didn't last. By the end of the week, whispers had turned into meetings. Emergency ones. The kind where blinds are drawn and assistants aren't allowed in. Colin kept his composure at first, striding through the halls as if nothing had changed, but his phone buzzed less, and his calendar started looking sparse. The board members, especially the women, had questions, hard ones. And this time, Colin couldn't charm or condescend his way out of them. Then came the internal audit, led by HR, legal, and two outside consultants brought in under the guise of cultural realignment. They started digging, pulling termination files, cross-referencing emails, requesting exit interviews. It was all quiet, clinical, and damning. The truth unraveled fast. Every firing, every demotion, every time Colin had replaced a woman with a less qualified man, it was all there, documented, patterned, malicious. The final blow came when Ava Malik's legal team sent over a formal letter, citing breach of ethical standards and alerting the press to the reasons Evergreen Systems had withdrawn. The phrase, discriminatory leadership practices, was right there in black and white. On Monday morning, Colin was called to the executive boardroom. He didn't walk out. Security did. By lunchtime, the entire office knew. Colin Dresner was gone. No press release, no farewell email. Just a company-wide memo signed by the board chair, citing irreconcilable differences in vision. But the real punishment came in private. In a final meeting with the board, recorded for legal purposes, they told him exactly how his career would end. You will receive a formal letter of dismissal, said the board chair, her voice as cold as steel. And it will state the reason clearly: gross misconduct, unethical termination practices, and failure to maintain inclusive leadership standards. Colin's face turned a shade paler with every word. This reference will not be vague, she continued. You will not receive a glowing review. In fact, we will make it clear to any potential employer that hiring you would be a reputational risk. You can't do that, he snapped, his voice cracking. We already did. He stood, furious. You don't understand what you're doing. You're killing my career. The chair didn't blink. You killed it the moment you opened your mouth. And that was it. No applause, no poetic justice delivered with a punch. Just the slow, methodical dismantling of a man who thought the world would protect him forever. It happened slowly, like the first light after a storm. Quiet, steady, undeniable. The day after Colin's dismissal, the energy in the office felt different. Not celebratory, no one dared that yet, but lighter. Like the pressure had finally lifted, and people could breathe again. The shadows under everyone's eyes seemed to fade. And then, the miracles began. It started with Chelsea. I got a message from her just 2 days later. They offered me my role back, full reinstatement, title, pay, everything. I'm still shaking. Then Priya, then Teresa, then Rebecca. One by one, the women who had been pushed out were contacted by HR and invited back. Not quietly, not with shame, but with formal apologies and written acknowledgments of what had happened. It wasn't perfect. Apologies rarely are, but it was a start. And then came the news that no one expected, and yet somehow everyone had hoped for. Richard Kane, the real CEO, the one who built Grayson and Hart from the ground up, was returning. The board released a statement announcing his reappointment as executive chairman and interim CEO. The words in the release were careful, professional, but every employee knew what it meant. The company was going back to its roots, back to sanity, back to respect, back to leadership. I received a personal email from Richard 3 days later. It was short, direct, and completely him. Layla, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you an invitation. We're rebuilding. I want you to help lead it. Come home. R. I stared at the screen for a long time. I hadn't planned to return. Part of me had moved on, emotionally at least, but this wasn't about going backward. It was about making sure the door stayed open for every woman who had ever been shut out. So I said yes. Walking back through the doors of Grayson and Hart felt surreal, like stepping into a place I once loved but had almost stopped recognizing. But now it was coming alive again. The halls buzzed not with fear, but with purpose. There were women in every meeting. Chelsea sat at the head of the strategy table, confidently pitching her ideas. Priya was leading product again, and already planning her new team. Rebecca had returned to legal with a sharp new suit and a fire in her eyes. And me? I was back in my office. Same view, same desk, but everything felt different. Not because I had my job back, but because I had something better. My voice, my place, my power. And I wasn't the only one. We were all back. Not because we were rescued, but because we refused to disappear. Colin had said that a woman in a high position would always ruin everything. He was half right. We did ruin something. We ruined his empire of arrogance, and we built something better in its place. Together.